Welcome, welcome, you beautiful people out there to the Switch for Good podcast. I'm Dotsie Bausch, and I am here with Alexandra Paul.
Hello.
And she is going to school us just a bit on foodborne illnesses as it relates to animal agriculture in light of this fairly recent news. It'll still be somewhat recent when this airs, from China on the coronavirus.
So I was listening to NPR this morning, and I was really irritated because they didn't talk about why this virus is happening in the first place. And our guest today will expand on it too, because he has a lot of knowledge about these kind of these viruses that transfer from animals to people. I'm actually not a pro on it. I'm just here to complain about the fact that they're not talking about why this is happening and how we could be stopping it. Because the coronavirus has, at this time in January 2020, has put travel to a halt in a lot of China at a time which is their Lunar New Year, which is sort of like our Thanksgiving, where people travel to their families to share the holidays. And a lot of cities have been put under a travel ban in an effort to stop this virus. Well, guess what, folks? I have a better idea, way to stop the virus is let's stop eating animals and confining them in unnatural ways, cruel and unnatural ways, and therefore spreading the virus from animals to human, where it's just not natural.
Right, because pumpkin seeds don't carry these viruses. They don't have the ability to, right? So
that's right.
Switch over to plant. I don't. So
yeah. So no
powerful protein-packed little seed there that you can switch over to, since she's telling you not to eat animals.
Do you remember when David Welch was on talking about clean meat? And one of the things that he said, one of the advantages of clean meat, even though it's not completely cruelty-free, one of the things is that it will not have the bacteria issue, and they'll be able to control any virus issues.
Any virus in the lab, yeah. So, yeah.
So anyway, folks, I know that in China, it's easy for us to blame the way they eat because they tend to eat animals we don't eat. Like this market where the virus started, the problem in humans started in Wuhan, China, originated, they believe, at an exotic animal market there, where they were selling animals like wolves and deer and raccoons and beavers and snakes. And they believe that the eating of those animals, the killing and then eating, transferred it to humans.
Right.
But it's easy for us to point fingers, but we have to remember what we do to animals here. The cows, the pigs, the chickens that we confine in horrible, horrible conditions, incredibly crowded, that could just as easily have a virus and has had viruses spread. So we just have to look at our own diets and practices. And our guest today is going to talk a lot about that.
Yeah. Well, this is a pretty big honor who we have on. So let's tell everyone about him so we can dive in.
Woo! So today in studio, we have the man who caused Oprah to explain that she would never eat a hamburger again. And that statement led to a lawsuit by a threatened beef feedlot operator, which made national headlines. And that was back in 1996. Well, the feedlot operator lost. And while we can't confirm that Oprah's never eaten a hamburger since then, this event demonstrates the impact of our guest today, Howard Lyman, our own Mad Cowboy. He is a fourth-generation Montana rancher turned animal advocate. Also, he's an author and an environmentalist. His momentous work spans from years spent on Capitol Hill to running his own nonprofit. We're in awe of his impact and inspired to continue his efforts here on the Switch for Good podcast. Welcome, Howard Lyman.
Well, it's a great joy to be with you ladies today. And remember that anybody that's viewing today ought to look at it and say, I wouldn't mind looking that well. Maybe I should be listening to what they have to say. This is a time in the world where almost everybody in the United States understands the benefits of a plant-based diet. Now, they don't all want to get on board. They all don't want to make a change. They say, well, what I'm doing is all right. But when you're talking about what's happening in China, we're talking about something that is happening not because of the problem with the individual, but the problem of the system. And the system is putting animals in situations that they were never designed to deal with. And when we end up with a virus going on, it spreads like wildfire. It's like gasoline and a match. You may not have ever pumped any oil. You may not have ever lit a match. But this conflagration that's going on is going to touch us all because what we're doing is wrong. It's wrong for the planet, it's wrong for the animals, and it's wrong for humans.
Now, you know all about this kind of animal confinement and treating animals a certain way, to which you just alluded, because you're a fourth generation farmer and you are actually a cattle farmer. You took a very small farm and made it into a huge ranch with 7,000 cattle. You actually loved it. You called yourself, I heard you in a talk say, I was Mr. Agribusiness. So tell us about the Howard Lyman back then. Like, who were you? What were you doing?
Well, I was raised on a small family farm in Montana, and I went to Montana State University, got a degree in agriculture, and never one time when I was in school did they ever talk to us about the environment. We didn't talk about what the problems were. It was all about how much to produce, how much more to produce, how much more money to make, how to get bigger or get out. Now, I bought that hook, line, and sinker, and I thought, I might as well become the agribusinessman of the year and see what I can go out and do. And the more animals I got and the more money I made, I thought, wow, I'm on top of the world. And, it wasn't until I was paralyzed from the waist down and I ended up with a tumor on my spinal cord, and the doctor told me, he said, you have less than one chance in a million you'll ever walk again. That was the first time I ever started questioning what I was doing and what it was doing to the planet.
So you developed this tumor on your spine, which you thought happened because of all the chemicals that you sprayed on your farm. I've heard you say you use herbicides, pesticides, hormones, and medications. How did this realization change the way you farmed? I mean, it changed your diet, right? Because you went to organic at that period of time, if I remember right.
Well, no, it didn't. The first thing it did is it changed my approach to the environment.
Okay.
The light never came on about the diet until, much later. It was the fact that my brother died of Hodgkin's disease, which came from the chemicals we were using on the farm. And it wasn't until some time later that the light finally came on and I understood that it's not just the environment. I was killing myself. I was killing myself with my fork.
What prompted you to so you got out of the hospital, getting a second chance at life. Did you change the herbicide and pesticide practices at your farm?
Well, I went to my banker and I said to him, gee, I want to make a change on my farm. I want to start growing everything organically. No herbicides, no pesticides. He looked at me like I came from Mars. He said, you want me to lend you money and you're not going to spend it with my other customers, the chemical dealers, the pharmaceutical dealers? He said, there will never be a day like that. And so then I was faced with the realization. I either had to continue to do what I was doing, which I thought was wrong, or make a change. Can you imagine what it was like? Have a wife and 5 children and looking at making a change totally different, doing something different than what I'd been trained in the university to do. It was the biggest decision I ever had to make in my life. And I'll have to tell you right now, there were lots of nights I didn't sleep because I didn't know what to do. But I thought, it's not only I'm killing myself, I'm killing the planet, every person that's out there that is eating what I am growing, the way that I'm producing it, I have to take some of the responsibility for their health. Mm-hmm. And it was a tough decision. You can't imagine how tough.
Yeah.
But I changed. And my kids looked at me like I'd come from Mars.
So just to clarify, when you changed, were you just thinking about the herbicide, pesticide, chemical thing, or were you thinking about meat is also killing us? What kind of decision did you make?
Well, when I made the decision, I understood what it had to do with my diet. And so it was not only the health of the planet or the health of the other people, it was the health of myself, my family. Can you imagine the meals we were putting on the table of our house? We knew, my wife and I knew, that it was not the healthiest for our children. Is any amount of money worth that? So we changed. And I'll tell you, if you want to know what an outcast is, be in Montana. Stand up and tell agriculture that what they're doing is wrong, that we need to change. It was like I had two heads.
So take us through some of the steps of what the actual action plan was. So you have 7,000 cattle and you are making a decision to completely give that up for the health of the planet and your family. And what did you do? What did you do to keep your food on the table for your family? And how did you transition out?
Well, the first thing we looked at is that what we were doing was wrong and we had to quit doing it. But you have to remember, I owed millions of dollars. And so I couldn't just go and turn the animals loose. I had to sell them. I not only sold my livestock operation, I sold the farm, the wheat ground, and what I had left was the house that my wife and I and 5 children lived in. I had 127 acres of ground, and the rest was gone to settle the debts. Now, in Montana, 127 acres is like a parking lot. There's no way in the world you're going to make a living on that. And so here I was trying to figure out, what am I going to do to put food on the table for my family? Well, I had run for Congress, and I had run against a 6-term incumbent. I'd come within 4 percentage points of winning, and I thought, you know, what I ought to do is go to Washington, D.C., work on Capitol Hill, and change the law. Let people know that what we're doing is wrong. Well, I went to Washington. I ended up working on Capitol Hill for a farm organization. And, you know, going around and telling people what we're doing in agriculture is wrong was not the happiest message in the world. But it was true. We needed to make some change. It's not like today. You know, you drive down the street today and Burger King has the Impossible Burger. Can you imagine back then in the 1980s telling people that they were going to sell a plant-based burger at a fast food drive-in? Was almost impossible to ever think about it, let alone have it. But I started out, I did what I could. I was ending up doing 100 radio shows a week. I was talking about people making a change, saving the environment, saving ourselves, saving the animals. And all of a sudden, Oprah heard about mad cow disease, and the only person that was on the media market in the United States of America that was talking about it was me. So she invited me. I went there. I talked. And, you know, when she said, that stops me cold, I will never again eat a burger, it was like the death knell to the animal industry.
Right.
Here
Howard,
was a lady that was talking to 40 million people a day, talking about not eating meat. Wow.
When you say, I want to just go back a little bit, because you had said that you made the change, and you said that initially after your tumor on your spine, you knew that you needed to, that it was probably caused because of the chemicals. But then you've gone into saying that you know what you were doing is wrong, your words. So all the way to, changing over your whole farm and getting rid of the cattle and not being in that business anymore. What was it? And maybe there were a few things. What do you mean when you say it was wrong and you went to Washington and shared with people that it was wrong? What was wrong?
What was wrong was the way we were doing it. We were treating animals as they had never been designed for, putting them in small, cramped spaces, no room to walk. We had chickens in cages so tight that they couldn't even flap their wings. We ended up with hogs that were in a cage that all they could do was stand up or lay down. And we were seeing how many we could make, how fast we could grow them, how much money we could make, but the suffering for animals was not even thought about.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about it because I'd been raised like that. But all of a sudden, the light came on, and I thought, wow, somebody's got to stand up and talk about the truth.
Howard,
it was wrong then, it's wrong now.
Yeah, Howard, I saw you in the documentary Peaceable Kingdom, which was an amazing documentary. It was about the transition of farmers away from exploiting animals to saving animals, and you were one of the farmers profiled. Can you tell us a story of what you would do with your cattle when you were a cattle rancher, and how you look at that now? So, because a lot of our listeners, they're city folk and they don't know anything about what goes on at a cattle ranch. And I did see your wife say quite graphically some of the things that needed to be done to an animal to keep it organized among 7,000 and to keep it so that you could maximize your time and profits while holding all these animals in confinement.
Well, the first thing is, to really make money, you have to bring a lot of them together in a very small space. You have to feed them just like you would a baby, that they would eat at the same time every day, because if they didn't, they would overeat, bloat, and die. So it was all timed out. If you ended up with a big storm and it froze the water troughs, can you imagine what it was like to have 7,000 head of cattle, hundreds of water troughs, all frozen, all the animals wanting to drink? You couldn't allow them to drink because the troughs were frozen. It was like mass production, and everything had to be done on time. They had to be fed on time. They had to be sorted on time. They had to be sold on time. And here we were, trying to figure out all of this, make money at the same time. And the animals didn't like it. They didn't like being that close together. They didn't like having to eat or drink in line. And it was something that we never thought about on the concerns of the animals. It was all about the concerns of the finances. It was a concern of the banker. It was about meeting a loan. And when you stopped back and looked at it and stepped away, it was wrong. It was totally wrong.
Did you have a moment? Was there an emotional moment for you that just changed everything? Because you've been doing this for quite some years there, and then you have this pretty big aha moment. It sounds like that was in a short period of time. Did something happen with one of the animals? Maybe a story with one of the pigs or one of the cows, or
no? It happened when the doctor told me. He said, you have a tumor on your spinal cord. You have less than 1 chance in 1,000,000 you will ever walk again. Here I am, lying in bed in the hospital, knowing I'm going to have an operation. I can't feel the foot of the bed with my feet. I know that I have a wife and 5 children. I owe millions of dollars to the banker on the animals that I have out there. And I'm all of a sudden looking at it and saying, what I'm doing is wrong.
But if I had a tumor, I would have thought, oh, it's those pesticides. How did you get to the fact of this huge empathy for animals?
Well, if you work with as many animals as I do, when you look them in the face, we had 7,000 of them. No 2 of them looked alike. You would look in their face, it was just like your children. You can imagine what it's like when you go home and your kids come running up to you. The joy you feel when that happens. The same thing happens when you have a relationship with animals. When they come running up to you and they look at you, there's an interaction that you have nowhere else in the world.
But you didn't see that when you were farming before this huge issue in your life, the tumor. So did it open your eyes, this close brush with death, and you suddenly recognized, your heart opened also?
Yep. All of a sudden, epiphany, huh? I knew that I was faced with was exactly what they were faced with. A termination of mobility. Now, I wasn't going to go to slaughter, but it looked like I was going to be in a wheelchair the rest of my life. How do you take care of a wife and 5 children out of a wheelchair? That was the most terrifying night of my life.
I just want to commend you, though, because a lot of people would say, how do you take care of your wife and 5 kids with not doing the work that you've been trained to do for decades? So you were able to make that switch. And so I think that's why you have such power when you speak. Both Dotsie and I have watched you speak. And Dotsie, you said you saw some very powerful.
Yeah. First of all, yes, I commend you on your bravery, because that's exactly what that is and what that takes. There was a talk that you did. It was, I think, 2009, and all of it was riveting. It was like maybe a 12-minute, and someone in the audience just filmed you, and so it's somewhere on YouTube. But one piece of it that I thought, man, people just do not know this. You were talking about, diseased cattle, and this was in relation, obviously, to mad cow disease. And you were talking about that there's about 100,000 cows a year that are fine when they go to bed at night and they don't wake up the next day. They're dead the next day. And that those cows are ground up and fed back to the cows. And possums and raccoons and what we call here roadkill are scraped up, ground up, and fed to the cows. Even euthanized dogs and cats from shelters with their collars still on, lined up to be ground up and fed to the animals that we're eating.
True.
That's unconscionable.
I think most people don't know that.
Definitely don't. I mean, we're feeding cows to cows, first of all. That's just like layers of
and
issues
then humans
there.
are eating them.
Right. All of us can, surmise all of the issues with what we just said, but what is most maddening to you about that?
Well, the thing about it is when we talk about cannibalism is when you eat your own species. When a cow eats a cow, they were never designed to do that. There's nothing in a cow's background that says in the locker back here, this is how you take care of eating another infected cow. There's nothing there. That cow was designed to eat grass. Well, we can make the animal eat it because when you put it in front of them and that's all they have, starve or eat it, they eat it. But it's wrong. And, in all the work what we've done, the one good thing that came out of it is in the United States of America, we no longer feed a cow to a cow. We're still feeding pigs, chickens, turkeys, horses, dogs, cats, but we're not feeding cows to cows. And this 100,000 that were dead at night, that probably had a high percentage of them had mad cow disease. That was like the gasoline that was going on the fire. So we have made some strides forward. We made some strides that people understand there's a difference between human health and what we eat. What you are doing, sharing information with people about making better decisions. We're not where we should be, but I'll tell you, it's very seldom you can go to a restaurant in America today that you cannot get a vegan meal. Could we do that 25 years ago? No.
So we're still feeding cows who are herbivores animal meat, but at least we're not feeding them their own species. And you talked about Mad Cow, and a lot of our listeners won't maybe have even been born then. So can you give us a background on what Mad Cow disease is, where it comes from, and how it affects humans?
Well, Mad Cow disease is bovine spongiform encephalopathy. What it is it's a prion in the brain. It actually, the animal is perfectly healthy, but this prion, from what they've eaten, goes to the brain, and it starts eating the brain up a little bit at a time. From the time an animal is infected until they show the symptoms of staggering, falling, and dying, maybe up to 12 years. But it doesn't mean they're healthy. It means they're infected, that they have the potential to share that disease with other animals, with the people that eat them. And, the amazing thing is the prion that causes the problem in cattle is the same thing that causes the problem in the human brain. Much of what is considered to be Alzheimer's in this country may be the human form of mad cow disease. We don't know because we don't check. They don't want to check because if you go in the operating theater and pull out the brain and find the prion, you've infected the theater. They can never clean it again and use it for operations other than to do the same thing on other brains. So it's something that, keep it in the closet, hide it, don't say anything about it. We'll call it Alzheimer's.
So, and is that Jacob's Creutzfeld's disease? Is that the human version of mad cow or bovine sponge?
Yes.
Okay. And are you saying that it's underdiagnosed here in the United States?
I believe that a significant percentage of the people that die with these death certificate that says Alzheimer's really had the human form of mad cow disease.
That's fascinating. Now, this was back in the 90s when you were touring the world and going on Oprah, which we're definitely going to talk about because that's a very, very important plot point. But can you tell us what's happening with BSE, bovine spongiform encephalopathy?
Nice.
Or otherwise known as mad cow disease. What is happening now after we were so scared in the 90s? Did anything change?
Worldwide, they've quit feeding animals to animals. The United States, we quit feeding cows to cows. We're still feeding pigs, chickens, turkeys, and horses to cows. We're feeding cows to pigs, chickens, turkeys, and horses. But the biggest problem, the biggest thing to add to the problem was feeding cows to cows. We quit doing that, so it's a significant step forward. Have we cured the problem? No. Are we better than where we were? Yes. But the solution, and don't let anybody forget this, the solution is change your diet. Eat as your human body was designed. Your body was designed to eat grains, fruits, vegetables, not cows, pigs, chickens, and horses.
Especially not cows, chickens, and horses who've been confined, right? Is factory farming something that has spread this disease amongst cows and therefore made humans more susceptible to it?
Yes, but there's one other problem. We ended up with hunters that were willing to pay a lot of money for trophies. And so they started taking deer and elk and confining them. And, if you're going to confine them, you have to feed them. What did they feed them? Cattle feed. And what did they end up with? And then we end up with the disease in deer and elk that is like mad cow disease. Well, they escaped. They jumped over the fences. They went out and they ended up sharing the disease with other like species. And I would say today that many of the roadkill that are collected by the state highway departments that are turned over to the renderers, they have the spongiform disease, and they're doing no more than sharing it with other animals.
Great. Oh, so you went vegetarian before you went vegan. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And then one of our friends, and who's also been on the podcast, Jane Velez-Mitchell, she did hard news for years and covered you. And I'll never forget her story. She told me a long time ago. She was vegetarian at the time. You had, I think, already gone vegan based on what you said to her. But she asked you about dairy and what you thought about it. And you looked at her straight in the eyes and said, liquid meat. And that day forward, she became completely vegan and took dairy out. What did you mean by that?
Well, when I look at all of the animal products that are out there, and you look at it, the most horrific on the surface is the meat, because we're killing them, we're slaughtering them. But if you look at the one that's the greatest problem, it's dairy. The human body was designed for mother's milk. There's a similarity between mother's milk and cow's milk. They're not the same, but there's a similarity to it. Mm-hmm. And what we're doing in feedlots compared to what they're doing in dairies, in my opinion, the dairies are worse today than the feedlots because of the way the animals are helped. But the problem, if somebody came up to me and said, you can only take one thing out of my diet, the first thing I would take out is dairy, because I believe there's more problems with the human health and dairy than there is even with eating meat.
Wow, that's powerful. Well, and if I can just talk about dairy a little bit and stay on the topic of these viruses that transfer. There's bovine leukemia virus, which is found in 100% of dairies that have over 500 cows. And there is some even in farms that have small farms that have fewer than 100 cows. The BLV, which is the bovine leukemia virus, is found in 83% of them. So it's found in so many dairy cows. And there are studies that are now looking at whether the leukemia virus in dairy cows gets transferred to
That's
humans.
What I was wondering, right?
And I'm wondering,
so many children that have leukemia.
And breast cancer in women is how they found links to that. There's a study in Berkeley that found links between this virus in the cows and breast cancer in women. So, Howard, because you were such an expert on mad cow disease, has the issue of bovine leukemia virus ever come up?
Oh, absolutely. And you know how we deal with it? In the dairy industry, they have levels of amount of contamination in the milk. Well, as soon as the procedure gets so bad that the amount starts exceeding the level, well, we don't change the procedure, we change the level. And when I was a kid, I was raised on a dairy farm. I knew what the level was that they would come out and check for. Today, it's astronomically higher because the abuses in the industry are so bad that they no longer can achieve the levels that we had in the past. And so they change them. And, there's no BLV in the milk if you don't look for it. If you don't look for it, it's just fine. Just because 100% of the animals in these large dairies have it, don't look for it. It won't be there. Nothing to worry about. It's just change the rules, close your eyes, and never assume that what we're eating has any effect on human health. As long as you believe that, there's no problem.
Yeah.
I don't believe that. I think there's a problem.
And in dairy, the cells are still alive, right? When you're eating meat, it's dead, and the cells are dead, so it makes more sense, I don't know, to a layperson like me that the transfer of diseases like that is much more hyper in cells that are still alive.
Is dairy still alive after pasteurization? I mean, people think it's safe, but viruses they're so virulent. We know that just from the avian flu, SARS, now the coronavirus, and now why not this virus passing through?
We'd have to see what the temperature is to kill the virus, and if that's high enough in the pasteurization.
You can certainly understand why Oprah said, "I am never eating a hamburger again." Can you tell us, Howard, you touched on it, but can you tell us about what you were on the show, the Oprah show for, and why there was such a huge lawsuit? Was it also against you too? I'm not even sure. Or was it just Oprah?
Well, what the problem was is that mad cow disease was really an issue in England. And so Oprah decided to do a show about it here. I was here talking about what we were doing in agriculture. They had a guy from the National Cattlemen's Beef Association there. His job was to say, everybody, it's all good, it's all perfect, it's no problem. We ended up with a guy from the university that was there and said, oh boy, I'm a researcher, I'm on top of it. But the fact of it is, when you talk to 40 million people, you need to talk about some common sense. If we got a problem, and we're treating animals as they were never intended to be treated, and we close our eyes and we don't look for a problem, if you don't look for a problem, I guarantee you'll never find it. All I did is went and told them the truth. I told them what we did, how we were doing it, and what I thought would happen in the future. Well, I'll tell you, 40 million people, the most watched show Oprah ever had was that show. Well, the cattle industry decided they had to do something, or the next thing you know, somebody else is going to have a talk show, and they're going to talk about the problem. So we need to go and make sure there's a price to be paid for talking about the abuses of agriculture. That's what the lawsuit was about, keeping other people from researching the issue, making it too expensive for networks wanting to put that show on. Mm-hmm. And so we went to Texas. We were in court for 6 weeks. We won. They sued us 3 more times. We won every time. And so the nice thing about it, tell the American people the truth, they'll change.
And that's pretty amazing, because I when I was researching, I heard you say that the jury, this was in Amarillo, Texas, where they held this, and you guys tried to get it moved because of the obvious, right? But that the jury was, you said, I've never seen so many cowboy boots and cowboy hats, and they were just all 12 of the jurors were, probably obviously from the other side, given that you were in Amarillo.
Although Howard probably fit right in because he's from Montana. You had your own cowboy hat.
We had one of our jurors, when they were interviewing her, her brother was selling the equipment for saying ground up cows being mixed into cattle feed. And
Wow.
they asked her if that would be a problem for her on the jury. She said, "Oh no." Can you believe that?
Yeah, that's not going to affect
But
it all.
obviously, your argument was so powerful that it ended up overriding any biases she might have had.
This is the first time learning about this with you, Howard, the food disparagement law, which I didn't even know that there was one. And I think when you said, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's in about a third of the states. 14 or so, which is just that you can't say anything disparaging about food.
Is that the law that you broke, or the law that they made after they lost?
Well, it was out before. They were pushing it mightily during the trial. It has never expanded since the trial. But the thing to remember in all of this, it's about telling people the truth about where their food comes from, what it's doing to their bodies. You know, I had a good friend in Los Angeles. There she was, almost 100 years old, a lifelong vegetarian. And during the Second World War in Holland, she was a vegan because the Germans ate all the food. Well, there was a lady at 100 years old who was more active than almost anybody for eating the food for our lifetime that her body was designed for. We do that, makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
It sure does. And congratulations on speaking the truth to power and winning. You wrote a book called Mad Cowboy. Tell us a little bit about that. It was about your journey from being a cattle rancher to a vegan.
Well, Mad Cowboy was published back in 1996. Today it's published in 13 different languages. I'm still receiving royalties for a book that was written back in 1996.
Good.
And the amazing thing about it, the sales of the book form, of the audio book form, are selling almost as well as the book sold back then. So here it is. I have copies of it in Chinese and Korean, Japanese, Polish, Spanish, you name it. And there are people all over the world who have read it. Then they're reading it now. And it basically says, pay attention to what's on the end of your fork. It'll make a big difference, not only on how long you live, but how well you live. And I can see from you two ladies, you're living well.
Thank you so much, Howard. You are too, because you're still going strong in your mid-80s.
Well, I
sharp as a tack.
let's put it this way. I'm not quite as active at 82 as I was at 40, but mentally, I can still do a crossword puzzle. So
awesome.
Cool.
So Howard, you would
go ahead.
You would tour all around the country talking about your views about how we treat animals and how it affects our health when we eat them. Did you talk to a lot of folks who were farmers like you had been, and how did you reach them?
Well, the interesting thing is that I've been in a lot of venues, and I've been in some of them, and you could always tell the audience, how many big hats and boots there were. So you always knew how many cowboys you had there. And I can remember I was in Denver one time, and I talked, and a guy stood up and said to me, he said, "Well, you don't know it, but I raise cattle." I said, "I figured that out as soon as you sat down." They know that what we're doing is wrong. There's nobody that thinks it's a good idea to ground up a cow and feed it back to another cow. They don't think it's a good idea. I've actually been to rendering plants where they've ground up horses that still had horseshoes on them. Steel horseshoes. And they ground them up, put them in the feed, and put them out and fed it. So when I went and talked to
heavy
people
metal
in
contaminants.
agriculture, I talked to them about the truth. Was it a good idea, or what we were doing, the chemicals we were using, the herbicides, the hormones we were using? They know what's wrong, but not many of them have enough intestinal fortitude to change.
Yeah. How do you have spoke all over for a long time. I'm assuming you still do some. Alexandra heard you speak 20 years ago in Los Angeles. How do you feel is the most effective way for you to reach people kind of in general about the issues that we've been speaking about today behind animal agriculture and what they're hiding in factory farming and the health aspect and the environmental aspect? But where do you really feel like you have the largest voice that people really seem to perk up and listen to?
Well, the first thing you want to do is never point at somebody and say, let me tell you what you ought to do. I'll guarantee you that's a non-starter.
Yeah.
But if you want somebody to learn, the best thing to do is say, I'm here to tell you my story. Mm-hmm. I want to tell you all about being the biggest damn fool in the world. Everybody's willing to buy into me being a damn fool, and their ears are open, and they listen, and they hear. And when you talk to them, this is what I did. This is what I ate. This is what we did on the farm. It's easy for people to look at me doing what's wrong, and at the end of it, they sit back and say, ooh, wait a minute. I did a lot of those same things. Well, I'm glad he didn't know I was a damn fool. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to talk to him about the problems that you've done, about how it got better. I can't tell anybody how important it was when I quit smoking. I smoked for 15 years. I was smoking 3 packs a day. And my kids, I had married a widow that had 3 children, and they came to me and they said, are you going to die like our dad did?
Yeah.
Better not. So I changed.
Yeah.
And the world smelled better. The food tasted better. The life was better to live. And it was the same thing when I quit eating cheese. When I gave up eating cheese, the taste of the food was better. The way I got up, there's nobody in the world that is either a professional singer or a professional speaker that does not realize that dairy products are the kiss of death for a good job on the platform. If you're going to be a good singer, you don't want to do dairy. You want to be a public speaker, you don't want to do dairy. Why is that? Because it has detrimental effects on your body. So if you're going to talk to somebody about making a change, make it about yourself. Wow. And imagine I quit eating cheese and how good I felt about it. Not about you ought to quit eating cheese. You point one finger at them. You have 3 pointed back at you. Don't do that.
It's hard to hit the high notes with the mucus in your lungs.
That's
just
right.
Not really. That is such good advice for all of us to heed.
Thank you so much, Howard. Your book is amazing for people who haven't read Mad Cowboy. The documentaries you've been in, among them, which I just saw last week, Peaceable Kingdom, which I mentioned earlier, and I wrote to Dotsie right away after I saw it and was just so inspired. And it took me a long time to get to sleep that night, actually, because it was so. The footage was
really
emotional, both warm, just in a heartwarming way, and also reminding us at how much we still need to work on.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Howard, thank you so much for spreading the word, not only today on Switch for Good, but all these past decades, and really making such an impact. Whenever I say your name, people just have so much respect and love for you. Mm-hmm. You've done so much for so many people and animals.
Thank you.
Well, I'll tell you a story. Just a week ago, I ended up stumbling, falling on my nose. Ended up having to get some stitches put in the nose. And the doctor that was putting the stitches in my nose, she said, you wouldn't happen to be the Howard Lyman.
There you go.
There you go. It's
That's
exactly
so cool.
right.
So, Anyway, I sound your copy of the Mad Cowboy book. So anyway, it's a joy to be with you. And you are two of the greatest spokespersons for change in the world today. Congratulations.
Thank you, Howard.
Thank you, Howard. That means so much.
It really
coming from
does.
you. Yeah.
It really does.
Thank you.
All right. Be well. Thanks again. This was awesome.
Bye now.
Okay. Bye-bye.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switchforgood.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.